Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of The Murder Part. Tonight we'll be looking at the case of Darlie Routier. And I realize there's a number of pronunciations.
Routier.
I'm sure we'll cover them all. I want to welcome my co-host, Jeff. How you doing?
Very good, very good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. What do you think about this case? Just initial thoughts.
Well, like many that we do, a lot of information, a lot of things that point towards guilt, a lot that points toward innocence. So definitely a lot of opinions there. But certainly abnormal. There's children being murdered, a mom doing it, or potentially doing it, and the dad that was not murdered and the kid that was not murdered as well. So a lot of abnormal details there.
Highly irregular case. Mike, how you been?
I've been pretty good.
What do you think about Darlie Routier?
Darlie Lynn Routier. When you first mentioned that we were going to do this case, I didn't remember and recognize the name. But as soon as I saw her mugshot, I was like, oh, she was on Unsolved Mysteries. That's where I know this case from. And then, looking further into it, it's definitely an interesting case.
Yeah, the silly string, which we'll get to, seems to be a key sticking point.
I really think that's the thing that convicted her.
Well, one of the keys to not being convicted is not to be charged. And you can make a good argument that she was charged because of the silly string. So if you're never charged, you don't have to worry about a jury.
Yeah.
And I think in that sense, I have to agree. I think the silly string did her in. But we'll get to that whole incident, which is bizarre in and of itself. Just another twist in a case that has quite a few.
It's definitely a windy road.
Yeah, odd case. So this case has a few pronunciation challenges, right? There's a lot of debate over, I don't think most people debate over Darlie, but her last name, Routier, there's I guess it has a kind of a French feel to it, so some people pronounce it like it's French. I don't know if it's French or not.
Routier, Routier.
Mike, now you're in charge of pronunciations.
But I don't know which one it is.
Just say them all the whole time.
Just switch them up.
The official pronunciation, if you want to call it that I found online, was like Routier, something like that. But who knows? Another point.
If we could ask Darren or Darlie how they pronounce their last name, that would be the definitive. Because when it comes to names, it's the person's name. You pronounce it however they want to pronounce it.
Yeah. Well, we see that. I don't know how familiar you are with the case of Chris Watts. It's a case I'm sure we'll cover someday. But the wife who Chris Watts murdered, at some point in the trial and the proceedings, not the trial, but like the sentencing or something, the parents called her Shannon, which is how her name is spelled, but she went by Shanann. And, I don't know the whole story behind that. There's different theories, but, it's up to her, I guess, how she wants to pronounce it.
Yeah, it is perfect. It's up to everybody how they want to pronounce their names. One of the Irish names is one of my favorite names is Siobahn. It's pronounced Siobhan.
There you go.
Yeah.
But, whoever pronounces it that way, that's the way it's pronounced.
Yep.
I take it when it comes to names. Other words, I'll be more stickler on. But names, it's all about the person. So, I mean, if we had somebody who knew the Routiers or the Routiers or whatever it's pronounced, and you can tell us how it's pronounced, that'd be great.
So another point of contention with pronunciation in this case is the city where it occurred. It's a small town police department, and there's a lot of accusations of poor investigation, which is pretty typical whenever a small town's involved. It's, I believe, Rowlett, Texas.
Well, I think it's Texas, so it might be Rowlett.
Maybe Rowlett.
Yeah. That definitely sounds more southern.
It sounds more. Like I'm not saying I'm not from Texas. I don't speak with the Texas accent, but it hits my ear as more Texas. Rowlett.
Could be Rowlett. Could be Rowlett. I don't know.
Pronunciation and a name, like people who are from there would tell you.
Well, it's interesting because we live in a town. I think we all live in Newark, right?
Yeah, it's right. Newark.
And
here in Delaware, we call it Newark.
Yeah, and people will say that's not Newark. It's Newark. It's Newark.
That's in Jersey.
That's New Jersey.
That's in Jersey.
That's the Newark International Airport in Newark, New Jersey. Here it's just Newark.
Just like, I don't know if you guys ever go up to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. People from out of town would say Lancaster.
Right.
And I think there's a Lancaster in California as well. And I think they say Lancaster over there as well. And I think locals would have you say, no, Lancaster. All one word, Lancaster. So there's definitely a lot of those things around here.
Yeah, so however it's pronounced, it is in Texas. It's 25 miles north of Dallas, Texas. Which I'm
So
pretty sure
disclaimer, we're diffusing ourselves of responsibility for pronunciation on everything that comes up by just admitting that we don't know how to pronounce some of these things.
Yeah, and we may never know. It's another mystery of this case that just is unending.
Those are the two biggest mysteries.
So this case starts from an outside perspective on Thursday, June 6th, 1996, in a town 25 miles north of Dallas, Texas. At 2:31 a.m., we see a 26-year-old Darlie Routier calls 911 and tells them that an intruder broke into her house, attacked her and her two sons. Now, her husband, Darren, who's 28 years old, and a third son, Drake, he's 7 months old. They're also in the house. They're not harmed.
They were upstairs.
They were upstairs. It was only the two sons that were with Darlie downstairs who were attacked. The police arrived in just minutes.
About 3 minutes.
Yeah, incredible response time. Maybe the only thing they did right the entire investigation. As they were securing the house, one of the first things they noticed was a window screen in the garage had been cut. They searched for an intruder. They went all around the neighborhood. They couldn't find any evidence of the mysterious attacker. So Darlie was attacked. Her 6-year-old son, Devin, was dead. And her 5-year-old son, Damon, would die before he was transported all the way to the hospital. So that's where we are. So kind of thoughts at this point. We have the police come in. These first few minutes in particular are always very sensitive in these cases. This is a police force that is not experienced with this type of crime, although, to be fair, I don't think anyone is. Mm-hmm. This is a very bizarre set of circumstances.
I think that there are some city police departments that see their fair share of murders, and they have murder police who are
a mother
experienced.
Sons. Yeah.
But yeah, a case like this where there's two boys dead and a mother that has been injured and attacked on the surface and saying that these things are happening. The investigation by a small town police department, very problematic. They don't have, I would imagine, much experience with that kind of thing.
One of the things that will come into play as we talk about it more will be the length of the 911 call, and as that relates to the potential timing of other events that may or may not have happened. So it was 5 minutes and something for the time of the 911 call. Is that what it was? Was it a little bit over 5 minutes? Is that what it was?
I don't remember the length of it.
I think it was a little bit over 5 minutes,
Okay.
but just how that she was on the phone with them for, I think, a little bit over 5
Well, they
minutes.
arrived in 3, though, right?
The police did? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so.
But she was still on when they came in?
She must have been.
Yeah.
But just that the length of time she was on the phone with the dispatch and related to the length of time that it was, an expert reported that, Damon would have been able to be alive after his wounds. And just all those numbers together are a significant factor.
Oh, you're right. It was 5 minutes and 44 seconds.
44 seconds,
Right.
okay.
That's right. Right, so I guess the police must have taken a little over. They must have taken at least that much time.
Well, it would have taken time for the 911 operator to dispatch them.
Right. Oh, right.
So
That's right.
from the moment they dispatched, it would
was
have
3
been
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been 3 minutes from the moment they were dispatched, which could have been 30 seconds or 45 seconds into the call.
Into the call.
Could even have been as much as a minute if the dispatcher was trying to still figure out what
she
Darlie
was.
was saying, where she is, what's the address. She's got to enter all that stuff in. This is 1996, so it's not quite as easy as it is today in many areas.
And how urgent it is. I mean, there's a lot of 911 calls that they're not in a rush.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? I know for mental health situations, I've dealt with the police many times here in Delaware, and they're usually pretty responsive. Like, so, when you're in an agency and somebody's threatening harm, and they need to go to the hospital, in Delaware anyway, you have to call the police. There's no private transport or anything. It's a bad idea because they could jump out of the car or whatever. And I've had days, and this is years ago when I did this type of work, but I've had times where I felt like I hung up the phone and I looked at the door and there was a state trooper putting his head in. Like other times, 6, 7 hours. Sitting there with a client who's not in good shape.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not every call gets prioritized, which makes sense, right? Not every call can be the highest level, but you would think that a double homicide would rank pretty high up there for response, especially that time in the morning. I mean, what else are they doing?
No, I didn't.
Naps,
Probably, maybe.
potentially.
I didn't. I didn't get a chance to read into this, but I had heard somewhere that one of the potential motives that people thought about was that Darlie wanted to continue living a lavish lifestyle. Do you guys know anything about the socioeconomic status of the family at the time?
I think I have that later on, where there's this claim about the insurance was one of the possible motives.
Okay.
Right.
And I heard that Darren had $800,000 policy or something. So that's So I'm curious about the area where they live.
From what I understand, they were in some debt.
Yeah.
There was definitely some debt going on, which goes into one of the potential reasonable doubt areas that happened later.
Well, so I'm curious if this is an area that has more wealth, or that people are a little bit more wealthy. I'm curious if that played into the responsiveness of the police, because if it's a wealthier area, maybe they have fewer instances of crimes, especially like this one, and maybe therefore, whoa, this is really urgent. Or maybe they're just, they got a lot of money going into the police department. So
I think if I remember right, this was a very nice home, and the Routiers maybe spent a little bit above their earnings.
Hence the debt. Yeah.
Which is incredibly common. There was a statistic I saw recently. I don't know, maybe you have a more updated one, but it was something about the number of Americans who have less than $1,000 available for like an emergency. And I believe it was about 40% of Americans were in that position. Something like that.
I heard something similar. I was going to say 50, but I had nothing to back that up. But yeah.
Yeah, so
I haven't heard that number.
it's something in that neighborhood. It's not negligible.
Yeah.
So at this point, Darlie tells the police that she's trying to explain kind of what happened. That she decided to sleep downstairs, so she was watching TV. She had been sleeping downstairs on and off for the last several weeks because the baby's crib was in a room, and the baby would wake her up when he moved, right? So upstairs in the bedroom, that's where the baby was. So she was just trying to get sleep. She would go down, sleep on the couch or whatever, watching TV. She was asleep in the family room with both Devin and Damon, again, the murder victims, when she felt a nudge on her shoulder and heard Damon faintly talking. She opened her eyes and saw a stranger wearing dark clothing and a baseball cap standing over her. So this is her setup for the story, and she expands on this, but this is where it all starts. Mm-hmm. So her introduction to the attacker is just kind of waking up from being asleep. Now, not a good position physiologically to respond, right? A little bit disoriented, hard to behave like effectively, like to ward off an attack when you're just waking up. Although she's young, so I'm sure she could spring into action fairly quickly. But
it's still very difficult when you're just waking up, and that whole fight or flight instinct kind of freezes, and it's actually the fight, flight, or freeze instinct. Like I can't run anywhere. I don't know how to fight. I'm in a bad position. I don't know what to do.
We would also learn that she had been stabbed, right along her neck, kind of towards her shoulder. But of course, it's unclear if that happened while she was asleep, if she did it, So
she continues. Let's see.
Yeah, she does continue.
Let's see what she says here. So at this point, she walked after the assailant. So she sees the assailant. The assailant moves away from her. She hears glass breaking. She got halfway through the kitchen, and she turned around so she could activate a light. She ran back toward a utility room and saw a white-handled knife on the floor. This becomes really important. This is when she realized that she was covered in blood. So to answer your question, it would seem that she's saying she was attacked when she was on, I'm guessing it's a couch. Was that mentioned specifically?
I don't know whether she specifically said I think she went to sleep on the couch, but I don't think at this point she's explaining like where she was when she woke up.
Okay.
So if she was stabbed when she was asleep, then her ability to get up, kind of be more coherent, would have been that much less than if she hadn't been stabbed.
Yeah, it's odd that the being stabbed wouldn't wake her up.
Well, there was one of the interviews I believe I heard with her was she talked about how she had like a concussion afterwards. So her belief or her lawyer's belief was that she got struck in the head first. Like she kind of, as she was waking up initially, got hit in the head, which caused her to black out for a bit, and then she was stabbed repeatedly, and then she came to from that. And the memory kind of, because of the blow to the head, the memory of the initial blow was kind of forgotten, was lost,
Right.
which is incredibly possible.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly plausible. So Darlie reached down at this point and picked up that knife. I talked about the white-handled kitchen knife. The intruder made his exit, so it was a male intruder, through the door in the garage. So this is a man door, not the garage door. I think it's a man door in the garage. So he walks out. Darlie dropped the knife and yelled upstairs to wake up Darren, her husband, again. And this is when she dialed 911. This call lasts 5 minutes and 44 seconds. 4 minutes and 5 seconds into the call, she indicates that there was a knife. Like, this is when she brings up the knife. The operator said, "There's a knife, don't touch anything." Darlie responded, "I already touched it and picked it up." So this is where this becomes very crucial in her prosecution later on.
Right.
It's almost like she's setting up her defense.
It seems that way, but also like I can understand where if she did get hit in the head and she's kind of out of it from having received a blow to the head, seeing a knife there and seeing an intruder, picking that up's not a thing you think about. It's this could save my life. I will take this tool and use it to protect myself. And then when he's gone, just okay, drop it. And then, oh crap, my kid's been stabbed. So things start to click because then you're kind of, your cognition is becoming much more stable after that blow. And so it makes sense to me why that might happen. And then the operator says, "Oh, don't touch anything. If there's a knife, don't touch it." And then she's, "Oh, I already touched it." Like,
Right. That was about a minute later.
yeah, I think that comment was definitely used of it by the prosecution to say, "Oh, see, she touched it. She admits she touched it." Like, yeah, she admits she touched it, but it wasn't that she just came up with that. What the prosecution did was they just showed that part to the jury where she came up with that statement that, "Oh, I touched the knife," but she was led to that statement by what the operator said.
She was. So
That's a good point. Sorry to cut you off, Dr. Grande. That's a good point. I was thinking that my instinct would be to pick up a knife if I saw it on the floor, right, in my kitchen or utility room or whatever. Not only for self-defense, but also I'm thinking, I've got 2 young kids. Maybe she didn't know. I guess at that point she knew like that they had been injured in some way. But yeah, I've got 2 young kids. I've got one upstairs. Maybe there's somebody else in here that's going to attack me, and I don't want them to use that as well. So, taking away another option maybe. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of different reasons.
Plus anything that might damage your feet. You want to get up off the thing? Legos?
There you go.
Pick up the Legos as soon as you can. They are caltrops. Like, pick them up. Pick up the knives laying on the floor. Like, it's kind of reasonable to me to go, "There's a knife on the floor. I should pick that up."
yeah, I don't think that's particularly unusual. And, it was a dialogue between her and the dispatcher. She's not like, "Hey, let me tell you about this knife. I got this whole story about the knife. Hang on." This was back and forth. Now, at 5:04 into the call, 5 minutes, 4 seconds, she said something about the knife was lying over there and I already picked it up. The operator says, "It's all right." Kind of like, "Don't worry about it. Let's focus." And she said, "I bet we could have gotten the prints, maybe." And this was, I think, one of the stronger points that we see later in the prosecution, this idea that, again, she's kind of building her defense, building this excuse why there wouldn't be prints on the knife by grabbing the handle of it.
I can picture myself saying that. If I was in a situation like that, if I had to just picture what I would possibly be thinking or doing during a situation like that, which I have no idea, of course, but I would try to be thinking, how am I going to figure out who this was? Oh man, I touched the knife. We could have possibly figured out gotten prints off of it or something. But of course, it could go the other way too. That she's trying to build up something, make herself look look innocent.
And I don't know what kind of media she liked to watch. I don't know whether she was watching the crime procedurals, Law and Order, that kind of stuff. But the more people tend to watch that, the more they are in tune with kind of the evidentiary stuff going on. So like if you watch a lot of true crime podcasts, Murder Part, or other kind of like Law and Order type CSI type shows, you're going to be more interested in those kinds of things. And that as things are kind of slowing down for her, becoming more real for her in that moment, it's very easy for her to say, oh, fingerprints. There could have been fingerprints on that, and I touched it. Oh my goodness, like that's not good. Like it's not like she said, oh, they're going to find my fingerprints on it. Oh my goodness. She's just like, no, we could have gotten fingerprints off of that.
Yeah, and it wasn't technical. It's not like she was saying, something about the forensic technicians dusting for prints and 5-point match, 7-point match. Like this was just, oops, I touched something that might have been helpful.
In a frantic moment, too.
Yeah.
Right.
Although it makes you wonder, if she was truly a victim in this, would she really be thinking at that time, this person's never going to get caught? I think most people would presume that the assailant would have a pretty good chance of being caught because they broke into the home, they probably left evidence. I don't know if she had any security cameras. I'm not aware of any.
I think the other thing is that at that point, the police would have been there. Like 1 minute or 40.
Right toward the end of her call.
Right towards the end of the call.
Yeah.
Like she's right at the end of the call. So the police were there. They got there 3 minutes after dispatch. They're there while she's still on the phone with that. The presence of those officers brings to mind investigation. It would to me. So the idea of, there's all these police officers around. They're going to be investigating. I want to be helpful. Oh, no, there's no fingerprints. I might have wiped the fingerprints off of that knife. Like that's where I think that thought may have been sparked. Of course, it's also possible that it was part of her planned out, story for how to cover herself, which didn't work. But it's reasonable to me to have, get police officers in my face. I'm thinking about investigating of things, like in the evidence and things like that. Not necessarily that, oh, we're never going to catch this guy. It's just, oh, I want to be able to help these people who are in front of me right now.
Yeah, I don't see anything up to this point in the timeline that makes me think she committed a homicide or 2 homicides.
Yeah, I don't either. At this point, I don't either. Darren, her husband, has been pretty consistent with his story over the years, especially when it comes to his son. And he tried to give CPR to his son. And the thing he said in interviews over the years, and I've seen recently a few different ones. There was one like right within a year of the events happening where he said, I blew into his mouth and there was air coming out of his chest. And then there was another interview that was done, I think, last year, where he says almost exactly the same thing. Not verbatim, but it's like he remembers it very clearly. Like that's a thing that happened. And so he's been very consistent with his story about he was upstairs, asleep. Then he heard Darlie screaming, calling his name. He comes rushing downstairs, sees the boys, tries to give CPR. Like he checks one, is dead. Checks the other, still alive. Tries to give CPR. And there's just air coming out of his chest.
Yeah, and I don't think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think Darren was ever like seriously a person of interest or a suspect.
I don't think they had any other suspect.
Just Darlie. Yeah, it was just Darlie.
Yeah, I think it was just Darlie. I think they immediately zeroed in on her.
Yeah, I think those people, the public, and this always happens, like people think, oh, somebody else must be guilty. But I don't think he was ever seriously considered as involved.
The way that Darlie responded to the kids would come up during the trial as well, during the trial, but also just in comments from people, just that she, one of the officers that was on the scene gave an interview and said something like he told her to help one of the kids and she didn't. She refused to, or she just didn't, or something. Now, Darlie, of course, she denies that. She said that's absolutely not true. But there's indications given that she was not there with the kids like they would have expected. And who knows how you're going to respond there, but you would like to think that your parental instinct would take over immediately and you'd be right there just like Darren did. So that's a point of contention too.
You'd like to think that often, but there are people who freeze up all the time.
Right, we talked about that before.
Like that. Yeah. And if she did freeze up, and there are indications that she had frozen up, at least once already. when confronted with this mysterious person. Her refusal to go and do CPR on her kid who's just bleeding, that could be super emotionally overwhelming for her, and be really tough for her to just be able to bring herself to even think about. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't surprise me. I've seen people who have been in those kind of emergency type of situations who are just been like,
Yeah.
So 2:31 is when the call went through. And now we move up to 3:40 a.m. Darlie goes into surgery at this point. So she had cuts. One wound on her neck was only 2 millimeters from her carotid artery. If it had cut that, obviously that would have been very bad for her. The surgeons had to remove.
I don't think she would have made it.
Yeah, that would be very low chance of surviving something like that. The surgeons also had to remove a necklace that had been pushed into that wound on her neck. But then we see other people that say, it really was not that bad. We just took it off. It wasn't really in there. So this is another thing that comes up with the trial, back and forth. How far was the necklace pushed into her flesh? Seems like they would take a picture or remember that, but I guess there's disputes about.
If you're in emergency trauma surgery, you're not going to take time to take pictures of all of the wounds. I mean, unless there's a police officer or investigator there at the time for certain things, like they'll do that nowadays. They'll do that with like gunshot wounds. Mm-hmm. Like if a gunshot wound comes in, there's somebody going to take a picture of it to make sure, because every gunshot wound has to be reported. But in 1996, not everybody had camera phones. Right. Cameras were a much, not rarer thing, but they weren't as...
They're pretty rare, I think, in 96, right?
In 96, remember, you had the disposable cameras, so like everybody could have a camera. There was a gift shop at the hospital, I'm sure, where they had disposable ones. But in the moment of trauma, like this woman is bleeding out. We've got to get her into surgery, get her sedated so that we can work on things. The last thing the surgeons or the hospital staff are thinking about is maybe we should take pictures of this.
Yeah, unless you were to tape a camera to a cell phone or to a phone, I don't think anybody really had a camera phone.
Yeah, and you could have taped a phone taped a camera and a phone together at that point. In 1996, the cell phones were huge. Like they were gigantic. You could just tape a camera. You could tape a Nikon camera to it.
There's my camera phone.
Like, yeah.
I remember my first cell phone was, I want to say it was around 94 or 5. It was a bag phone. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And it was like a transformer. Like, that buzz when you walk by the big transformers? That's kind of what it did. Like, if you're in the vehicle with it.
He's got the strap on.
It was scary. I think it was 3 watts, which I don't think they make them anymore that powerful. They have to be that powerful anymore. But yeah, it had... it was fierce. It was also like 90 cents a minute.
We had car phones in our cars. Yeah. When I was growing up, the same thing. Like they had the phone unit was huge. It was a big box set underneath the seat, and just had the handpiece that came up and sat. Was mounted in the thing. They were huge, but yet they didn't have cameras in those phones. So like I said, I can understand why there weren't any pictures of it.
Yeah, it's just a shame because that became such a critical point that a photograph could have cleared that whole issue up. Yeah. So a few hours later.
There are some people who said that, none of the wounds were really that grievous. And then, of course, the medical examiner who testified to the case said it was only 2 millimeters from her carotid artery. Like she got super lucky that it didn't go that extra 2 millimeters.
And the scar looked really bad. After
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
it looked horrendous.
It looked fierce. Now, of course, I'm not talking from any type of, I'm not a physician, but certainly it's hard to imagine somebody inflicting that on themselves. Just the graphic nature of it, but...
Especially where some of those were located, like they were on the back of her arm. And like she ended up having bruises all up and down her arms and a couple of cuts on her hand. Of course, the prosecutors would say that those cuts came from handling the knife, but they were also consistent with others would testify consistent with defensive wounds or having her hands up. Some of the people at the hospital said that they were superficial, like they weren't much of anything. if that, and others who were at the hospital said, yeah, her whole arm was bruised from the minute one. And like we saw these gashes were huge and deep and we had to clean them out. And so there's conflicting testimony about how bad those wounds were. But the prosecution cherry picked the ones that said that they were superficial.
Yeah, sometimes I think with these witnesses in particular, it's almost like a ball falling down on a peaked roof. It's going to end up on one end or the other, not in the middle. Right? Like they get a little invested in one story or the other, on the side of the defense, on the side of the prosecution. It's just strange to me they all wouldn't be clustered together pretty close in what they saw.
Yeah. Well, that brings up the fact of the one investigator that had ruled there'd been no intruder. Like, when he was at the scene, ruled there was no intruder here, and really how that set the course for the rest of the investigation and the trial.
Yeah, so let's talk about, before we get to James Grande, that's the crime scene consultant they brought in. We know at 6:11, Darlie was interviewed. She could not offer a description of the assailant's face. Nothing. This seems a little odd, but based on her testimony, she saw him briefly and then he ran away.
Again, if it's dark in the house, if she's been hit in the head, she's just come out of surgery, so she's been under anesthesia for a while. She only caught a glimpse of this person's kind of outline. To me, again, reasonable that she wouldn't have much more in the way of detail.
Yeah, it's plausible, but usually people who are attacked can describe a face. So she's like, there's all these check boxes that she's missing. I think that's how they're thinking of it. Like, okay, one might be just coincidence, explainable, but we have a combination of low probabilities starting to stack up. But now we move to this crime scene consultant, James Grande. He arrived at Darlie's house within 20 or 30 minutes. 20 or 30 minutes after arriving, he already determined there was no intruder. So and you mentioned him, like, right away, no one else was here, which does shape the investigation.
It really does.
Yeah, so you're not even looking for another suspect. Yeah, so...
Yeah, at that point, other investigators are like, well, if nobody else was here, there's only two people it could have been.
Right. And at that point, they probably were starting to understand, based on his behavior, that maybe Darren isn't really that suspicious right now, but she was down there with the kids, so...
Yeah. Yeah, tough circumstances when you kind of box off a possibility that early with the intruder issue. Like,
right.
He should have just kind of left that open to see where the investigation took him, like where the evidence actually took him. So now we see that, we see kind of the evidence build up. Now we're kind of building up to the silly string incident, which would occur on June 14. But before that, we see kind of a grouping of evidences collected here. We see the prosecution initially didn't really get too invested in the idea of insurance, like this was for insurance. Later, it seems like that did come up as an idea, but that wasn't what they were talking about, like pre-arrest. Their theory was kind of that she was suicidal and was depressed, and her sons were keeping her from an extravagant lifestyle, which I guess would fix her depression. I guess that's their theory. They're all mental health professionals in addition to being attorneys, which is common. Like I joke about it, but I feel like they kind of have to make decisions like that, but they rarely bring in the experts at the right times. Mm-hmm. This is an important stage where they're making these decisions, and later on they go get the experts that agree with whatever their conclusion is.
Right. Find the right experts.
Right. Exactly.
Remember, this is less than a year after Susan Smith,
Right.
right, who had murdered her two kids, her 3-year-old and 14-year-old, by strapping them into the seats of her car and pushing her car into the lake.
Right. Very cold.
Very, very cold. But then she came out and said that she'd been driving around and had stopped, and a black man had stolen her car with 2 kids in the back and driven off. And then investigators later found out that there was no black guy who stole it. There was no one assailant. It was she'd done it herself. So this was like Darlie's case was right on the heels of that.
Yeah, and if you I don't know how much these officers would have kind of paid attention to the Susan Smith case, but it's reasonable to believe they would have been aware of it.
Yeah.
And a key part of that case, other than the false accusation against a black assailant who, again, didn't exist, was Susan Smith's relationships with men. Right? It was she had like a very emotional, erratic pattern. She was highly promiscuous. She ran into a number of problems with men. And I think it probably formed this image that type of kind of emotionality must be connected with, or could be connected with homicide. Like that's the type of person that could do this. It turns out that Susan Smith would later have sex with a prison guard, and he would get fired. And he would go on these different, I believe he's on a few different shows, saying like how she manipulated him. He didn't come off well. In the,
No.
You're the employee. You're the guard.
Yeah, I don't know. Everybody's got their own self-control. Like, if you're going to engage in activity, it's because you're kind of choosing to some extent. There are stages at which other people are able to manipulate people, but it comes down to choice. If I don't want to do something, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, I'm sure that was in the rule book somewhere.
And I'm pretty sure for male, anyone who is a correctional officer in any facility, I think one of those rules is don't sleep with the prisoners. Right? I think Jeff and I both had you for supervision when we were in our master's program. We were in grad school together. And we had you for supervision. The very first thing you said, and the very first supervision thing was, don't sleep with your clients. Very first rule. So that's rule number 1 in the therapist handbook. Don't sleep with your patients. Right? I'm not wrong.
But wait,
you remember that. But wait, no. Rule number 1, don't sleep with your patients.
But what about...
No. There's no what about. There's don't sleep with your patients. Yeah. So, yeah, he doesn't come off looking well. Like,
no, it was bad. And the interesting thing is the media at first kind of gobbled it up like, oh, it proves that Susan Smith is diabolical and a master criminal. Or it proves this officer doesn't have any self-control.
Yeah.
You take your pick. Yeah.
I'm going to go with the lack of self-control on that one.
Yeah, like you said, he made a choice there. Oh, she made me do whatever. I couldn't help myself. Yeah.
So back to Darlie, we see this evidence piling up. Right, we talked about some of it. We see that the police officers testified. Now, the prosecutor knew they were going to do this, so this was like the evidence building up to it. They would also testify. But the police officers said that Darlie was overly concerned with her injuries, had not rendered aid to her sons, which you mentioned. And, this proved that she was they didn't say this, but they're getting at she's psychopathic. She's cold and callous. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, if I just got stabbed in the neck and the arm and gotten into a physical altercation with somebody and I'm bleeding all over the place, I might very well be concerned with my own injuries at that point. And we have talked about how she might have frozen up when it came to trying to render aid to her children who were covered in cuts and blood. And that could be a very traumatic thing to see. And so I can understand why she might be, but this guy, kind of like the Scott Peterson receipt thing, right? Is damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, oh, he has a receipt. No, that's kind of suspicious. Well, if he doesn't have a receipt for the gas station, that's kind of suspicious.
If she was bleeding all over the place and was like, don't even worry about it, they would be like, oh, look, she's really a killer. She doesn't even care about the blood.
She doesn't feel pain at all.
She's like a monster. So the next bit of evidence here, and this becomes huge at the trial as well, is this window screen.
Oh, yeah.
So the police initially determined that there's dust around the windows where the screen was on, and it's impossible that somebody could have entered or exited through it.
So to be clear, this window is like a floor-to-ceiling window, and it had an opening that was about like the bottom of it is like 6 inches above the ground. It's not like just a small window that you have to climb 5 feet up to go through. It's floor-to-ceiling, and it opens up about halfway up and has a screen that covers the whole thing. Right? And there was a slash in the screen from something, and they're like, you couldn't go through and get into the house without disturbing the mulch
or the dust on the
or the dust on the windowsill. Well, there are demonstrations of people doing exactly that, and the mulch was 6 feet to the left of where that window is. Like there's a flower bed that has mulch, but it was like 6 feet away. You could have walked right up there on gravel, stepped over the windowsill without a problem, without disturbing any dust, without leaving footprints in mulch. Not an issue. But they said because there's no footprints in the mulch and no dust disturbed on this windowsill, nobody came through here. And the screen was slashed.
That hurt her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. We'll get to the how that slashing took place, and the knife in a moment. The next item here is a man's white tube sock was found by the police near a storm drain 75 yards from the house. The sock had blood a little bit from both murder victims, Devin and Damon. This seems exculpatory, yet the prosecution said no, Darlie must have planted it.
Yeah. I don't know where the sock, like, I don't know how the sock played a role in the murders. Like, it had, like, maybe quarter-sized dots of blood on it, which would be more consistent with somebody wearing it on their foot and stepping in cast-off blood, and then realizing that it's there and taking it off and moving away.
Perhaps especially a 5 and 6 year old, that just may not, may not understand if they're stepping in something that's going to hurt them or make them bleed or something like that. I don't know.
Well, this was a man's.
It was a man's tube sock.
Yeah.
Yeah, so more consistent with if there was an intruder who happened to like take his shoes off outside so that he wasn't, making noise on hardwood floor if there is any. We're walking around his stocking feet. If he killed somebody and then stepped in the blood and then got out and felt the blood, took the sock off, put his shoes back on, goes running, and then just kind of drops it as he's going. It's kind of consistent with that. I don't know how, like, Darlie doesn't strike me as the super intelligent supervillain type who would think about that exact scenario and go, I got to go plant evidence over there. Plus, it was 75 yards away. It would have had to been done inside of, a 2-minute window, 3-minute window.
Yeah, the math of this is pretty fascinating because the theory is that she would have had to plant the sock before committing the murder. And of course, it had blood on it, right? And usually people notice if they're bleeding. Like kids would notice, hey, I'm bleeding. You cut me. Like that's not something to just go away.
Yeah. Right. And if she cut them, I'm sure they would have been screaming. They would have been screaming their heads off, and that would have woken up Darren.
Right. So she would have had to. She had 3 minutes to plant the sock, get back to the house, commit the crime, stage the crime scene, and self-inflict the wounds.
So she would have run
150 yards total.
So 1.5 football fields, right?
Yeah.
In that amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Now we also, as far as I know, and maybe somebody knows this, but as far as I know, we don't know how old that blood was, or potentially even how long that sock had been there, right?
No.
At the time of the murder.
No, I don't think we do. I don't think we know how long it was there.
So it's possible it had been there for days.
Right. She could have collected it.
And she could have collected blood slowly over time, and then,
or it could have just, I don't know, for some unknown reason, just been there. They had dropped it for some reason. I don't know. I guess anything's possible there.
No, maybe it was the nosebleed sock. And she used it. The kids were getting nosebleeds, so she just uses that sock to sop up the nosebleeds, and then, I'll get rid of this because this has blood on it, and it just runs down, tosses it, runs back.
Now, this compressed timeline is based on the idea that Damon lived no more than 9 minutes after his wounds were inflicted. Mm-hmm. Now, the prosecution said that she could have planted the sock long before. So going to your theory about blood collection, she could have done it that way. So again, we see another area of contention. The 911 call, and we talked about that with the prints on the knife. Obviously, that was used to make the decision to charge her. And then we come to, I think, probably the most important part in terms of her being prosecuted, which was the
you want to talk about the screen first?
Let's go to the knife. Yeah,
go to the knife on the screen.
Yeah.
As long as we're going over the evidence before we get to the silly string part.
Yeah, so the knife obviously had her fingerprints on it. No other prints were identified on it. And it had some type of fiber consistent with or some knife in the house had.
I think it was another knife that was
another
in the
knife,
in the
right.
block.
So the murder weapon had prints of only Darlie. Another knife in the butcher block had these fibers from the screen. And there was a lot of debate over the science behind this.
Yeah, they were saying something about it being graphite,
Right.
like graphite shavings or something like that. But most window screens are made out of aluminum, like very fine strain aluminum. How would graphite get on there? You know what? You know what I could see being confused with or testing as graphite? Ceramic, which would be consistent with a honing stone for sharpening a knife. That's much more consistent with graphite than
Possible the aluminum had graphite covering, perhaps to maintain color or something.
it's usually more of a paint.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on screens, but I did look into some of those things because of this particular case. Like it's aluminum usually painted with some sort of paint to keep it from degrading
Sure.
and oxidizing over time.
This is also a test you don't see run very often. And I'm just skeptical that they really knew what they were doing. I mean, and they were very sure. Not only that, they were sure about the direction the screen was cut.
Right, that was the thing that got me. Like how do you know that the direction of screen is cut? Once it's cut, it's cut.
Yeah, I don't see how they.
I don't understand how you could get
I guess maybe
down.
pieces of it are twisted outward, or I don't know.
I guess it could have been the direction that they were pointed as they were cut.
But
Perhaps.
how many times do you cut into a screen and look at it to determine that that's the thing that happens every single time to be able to determine directionality? And then you got to cut from the other side too to be able to determine that that's
Is that consistent?
like, is that consistent? Can we tell directionality? I don't know. It doesn't seem like something that would be plausible to me
Well, consider if you have an assailant who's fairly strong.
because I've seen it cuts downward.
Right? You have an assailant who's fairly strong. They can punch that knife in quickly, punch it in, and then pull it back toward them as they cut down, which would have the same effect as being from the other side, pushing forward with your hand. Who's to say that's what he didn't do? Like he sticks it in, just kind of pulls it back like a zipper.
Right, as he's coming down, coming back towards himself, which pulls the screen out a little bit, and acts just like if you were cutting from inside. The directionality is really troubling.
Yeah, and that was a big deal against her.
Did am I remembering correctly that along with the graphite possibility on that knife, that some were wondering if it had something to do with the stuff that the investigators were using? You know, whether it be whatever kind of materials they were
Fingerprint
using,
test.
yeah, fingerprint test or whatever. Am I remembering correctly that some people think, well, maybe it's debris from that, or maybe it's some kind of something from that?
Well, there is a lot to be said about the investigators and police, especially the initial responding officers and the paramedics disturbing that crime scene.
Yeah.
And just doing a lot of stuff, moving things around. One of the points that the prosecution ended up making was about blood and the glass, like saying that the glass broke and then Darlie went through the kitchen, so her blood should have been on top of the glass that was there, but it was found underneath. Which, first of all, if the police officers were moving things around and kicking things around, there's perfectly reasonable why it would. Second of all, if that blood didn't come off of her but came off of the assailant as he was walking through and then the glass broke, that's consistent with why there would be blood under the glass and not on top of it. But that's not what they said. That's not what the prosecutors were claiming. Because the prosecutors were already convinced there was nobody else in that house. So they're looking for inconsistencies with that story.
Right.
For anything that kind of, if another person's not there, this is proof that she did it. But if we look at it, another person is there, there's reasons why this stuff is the way it is.
Yeah, there was also evidence that the kitchen sink was cleaned. Traces of blood were found on the on the counter right near the kitchen sink.
Like it was smeared.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like she attempted to clean it. Again, it's hard to imagine that happens in the timeline that was available.
Right. Like, when did she try and clean it?
She was sprinting to put the sock. So she's like a world-class Olympic athlete all of a sudden. She comes back, now she's cleaning the kitchen.
Cleaning the kitchen, all while her kids are, one of them's dead, the other one is dying.
Unless one,
no, both of them were dying at that point because it was like 9 minutes before the first one from the moment of the attack. So before the attack, she somehow collects blood from the boys without cutting them, runs down, drops the sock, comes back, attacks them, then tries to clean the sink, and then inflicts wounds upon herself before calling the police.
unless one of them was killed first, and then she did other things, and then went back for the other. Who knows? I think there's a multitude of things that could have been possible here.
But we keep running into the intelligence barrier again. You know, she doesn't really present as amazingly intelligent. I mean, she may be. You know, it's hard to tell. I mean, you can't look at somebody and know that. But nothing that she's done really, struck me as like this is like a mastermind. Like she could figure all these things out. She seems pretty straightforward. You know, average intelligence, maybe something like that in that area.
I would hazard to guess that the three of us are above average intelligence. And I don't think that the three of us together could come up with a plot this sophisticated, to figure that out and then implement it.
I guess we'll have to try, though, at this point.
That'll be next on the murder part.
Well, she also did this, of course, without. I mean, the internet was available in '96, right? It would have been.
It was ish.
Yeah.
Available-ish.
So she did this all from knowledge she had, without searching things or whatever. Seems hard to believe.
Seems unlikely.
Unless she watched shows, like you said before, Mike. Maybe unless she was consistently watched these.
Well,
these
unfortunately,
movies.
she wasn't watching the murder part.
If she only watched this episode,
If she'd watched this episode, she would have known everything not to do.
it's when you climb in the DeLorean and go to the future and check things out and then go back. So, moving to this grave site service. The funeral was on Sunday, June 9. Darlie was released from the hospital just a day before that. So the next Friday, June 14, Devin would have turned 7.
Yeah.
That was his 7th birthday. So Darlie and other family members, she wasn't alone, and friends were at a birthday party at the grave site. There were balloons, toys. Some people smiled during the
Including Darlie.
during the event. She smiled, she laughed, and she did maybe the worst thing that any human being could ever do. She sprayed silly string.
At the grave.
Yeah. At the grave. While smiling and chewing gum. It's the worst thing ever.
Yeah, that's what all classic villains do, right? It's
We've seen it in every movie.
it's overplayed, right? Like you got like the Joker, he's got the silly string, Thanos didn't he have some silly string
Yeah,
next to the
Thanos had the silly string came off of the Infinity Gauntlet. He snapped and then silly string everywhere.
it's just a mess.
It was terrible. Now, you know who uses silly string quite often? Spider-Man.
That's right.
Sometimes he gets the silly string instead of the web.
He mistakes the silly string from the web.
It's easy to do, I think.
It's really bad when he goes to web swing and it's silly string instead of webbing.
And it just happens to be near a grave. He's done.
Like Gwen Stacy's grave, unfortunately. Then he's going to get arrested for that. Of course, J. Jonah Jameson's always been trying to get him anyway. That's another tangent right there.
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? The lead prosecutor would say how disgusted, strong word, he was that anyone could act this way with the silly string.
Right. And this was caught on by newscasters. Like the media was there in trucks and they filmed this. It wasn't like home video that they suddenly found years later. It was newscasters were there watching. But what the newscasters didn't show was earlier that day there was a very somber, very very sad gathering of all of these people as they went through another a second memorial service for the boys, and kind of everyone was crying, including Darlie. Like everyone was there, and the silly string, which was Devin's favorite thing, was actually brought by Darlie's sister and was handed out. And Darlie wasn't the only one who was spraying the silly string, but the media, whoever the camera person was real quick to zoom in on her as the silly string started going, with the smile and everything like that. Other people were smiling too, and other people were smiling and doing the silly string thing at the same time. and you see a glimpse of it. If you watch the video, you see a glimpse of it kind of off to the side. Somebody else sprang silly string, but then it zooms in on Darlie. And you can't see anything else other than that. Right. And apparently, the jury watched that tape like 19 or 20 times during deliberations. Over and over again, they watched that.
They were transfixed on it. Yeah, so she is charged, right? So this leads to her being charged.
Everything it was like right after that aired on the news.
Right. 4 days later, she was arrested.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this would become the, disgusting emotional evidence, the silly string incident. There was some other things, though. We see this T-shirt that she was wearing was stitched back together, and all the holes in it didn't line up with her wounds. There were 4 holes that didn't correspond to any wound. This, again, seems like very shaky. Shirts are pretty flexible. They're fabric. I mean, they can go all types of directions. This isn't like putting one piece of plywood in front of another and firing a bullet through it and wondering why the holes aren't aligned. I mean, the shirt could have slid all around.
It could have slid all around. Also, they had to stitch it back together because they cut it off of her at the hospital. And sometimes you start cutting, I know from cutting shirts and things myself, you start cutting and it just doesn't want to, so you start somewhere else and go. And that could have happened 2 or 3 times, and then you got these things that look like they were part of the wounds that are holes, but they don't match up with anything.
Yeah. So again, like one more kind of shaky test that I think is pretty easy to rebut.
Do we know when it was stitched back together, or by whom, or how? I didn't read.
I think it was by the investigator. The investigators did it.
Okay. Which it's even more shaky. Like why? What do they have to do with the placement and how it lines up?
Yeah, my guess is they were kind of looking for that. maybe that guided their hand a bit. So you talked about the glass, the broken wine glass on the floor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was used against her. The blood, obviously, on the countertop we mentioned, and then of course the blood spatter. And we see, a lot of differences of opinion. This was not conclusive, in my opinion, with the blood spatter.
Blood spatter never is, and it's just not ever going to be.
It's a messy business.
Yeah. It's just like handwriting analysis, which is not reliable at all.
No, I didn't have any confidence in. I think sometimes like the presence of blood spatter itself tells you something. Like, oh, there's blood.
Yeah, there's blood.
Yeah, but the whole idea that you can kind of read the spatter like a hieroglyphic and come up with an ancient tale, I just don't buy it.
How do you become an expert in that? Do you just sit there and stab something and then pull it out and say, all right, here it is. Here it is.
Did you ever watch
Yes.
the show
Yes,
Dexter?
that's what they do. That's what they do.
No, I haven't.
That's what the blood spatter analysis actually do. They actually will go in and take instruments and try and recreate a pattern by doing it the way they think it was supposed to be done and the way they don't think it's done, and they'll do it over and over and over again and see, hey, these ones are consistent with what we see in this crime scene versus this, but that doesn't take into account the very specific things, because you have to do it in a room that has all sorts of like white paper on it so you can see the spatter. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take into account the environmental stuff that goes on in real life.
Yeah.
So Jeff, you didn't see Dexter?
No.
I love Dexter. I can't wait for the new one to come.
I think season 8, right?
Yeah, it's a reboot.
Right.
Yeah, they're rebooting.
But it'll be the 8th.
Yeah, I think so. Either 8 or 9.
So 8 or 9.
Maybe Sam can check on that.
Yeah. So spoiler alert for Dexter, because I know it was a long series, but spoiler alert.
He's a blood spatter analyst.
Yeah, and
he's a blood expert in general.
It ended in a very unsatisfactory way, and I think that's one of the reasons. It did. But yeah, he was an analyst, like a tech for like a police department. I think it was Miami.
Yep.
And he would he would put the white everywhere, whatever. He would hit like a head shaped thing with like, I guess, filled with blood or whatever paint, and then look at the cast off, look at the spray, and be like, oh yeah, this must have it came from this direction with this much force. I don't know if you can really do it as well as he did it, but then again, he had some extracurricular experience.
He had some extra writers too, really good writers.
Oh, that's the one where he's like also
he was a serial killer.
Serial
yes.
killer as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He moonlights as a serial killer.
Yeah.
My other job.
No. That's his career. He moonlights as a blood analyst.
Yeah.
They kind of drew from Gary Ridgway on that one. That was his career.
That's right.
Was killing people. But he Dexter only killed the bad people. Like, he only went after people who killed other people.
He's like the Peter Pan of serial killers.
Robin Hood.
More
sorry.
Robin Hood.
Yeah,
More
that's what I
Robin
meant.
Hood. Yeah, not Peter Pan. Like, he did grow up.
Well, maybe he is. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Robin Hood.
Yeah, I thought that Dexter was. I mean, the series deviated from the books a bit.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, it really did. But I think the series worked, and at the end, like so many times, like Game of Thrones, when you get to the end, it's like they're just tripping over rakes and stuff. Like, what happened? And maybe they're going to fix that. Now they've had a lot of time to think about their bad behavior. Maybe they can fix that.
They've been punished enough. They can come out of timeout and fix it.
It really was good, probably all the way through 4, somewhere around there, and then it started to.
Oh yeah, through the season with John Lithgow. Like,
Yeah,
he was amazing. That was a great season. If you haven't seen it, watch Dexter. It's actually a really good show. If you like this show, it's nothing like that. Like, it's nothing like this show.
I'm trying to think. Was John Lithgow also? He was Harry and the Hendersons a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
But was he also Winston Churchill in The Crown?
I don't recall. I know he's done a lot of stuff.
I remember he's like way taller than Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill was not very tall.
I think he was. I think he did a good job in The Crown. And another kind of sci-fi crossover was Dana Scully. What's her name?
Gillian Anderson.
Gillian Anderson was Margaret Thatcher. Incredible job in The Crown. Crown didn't really have much in the way of murders and stuff, but it was a good series. Yeah. But Lithgow, really talented.
John Lithgow is really talented. He's in the Twilight Zone movie when they redid Terror at 30,000 Feet for that segment. He's in Third Rock from the Sun. Super funny show about aliens on Earth. Mm-hmm. Not lizard aliens.
Just regular.
Just regular aliens.
Regular aliens. Boring aliens. No one's interested
boring aliens.
anymore.
Nobody's interested in those guys. They live in the suburbs. But John Lithgow is a very talented actor. But he was definitely in Dexter. It was blood analyst. Like, he ran blood tests and DNA tests and everything. He wasn't just the spatter guy, although that was his favorite part, was the spatter. He liked doing those tests.
Yeah, I don't remember the actor's name, but I like the...
Michael C. Hall, I think.
Well, of Dexter, being the actor of the sergeant who was in the earlier episodes. He always knew.
Right.
He knew
something was up. But he knew it was up.
Yeah, he was a good actor. They didn't leave him in very long.
He was. I think second season he was gone.
Yeah, I really liked this character. They should have kept him around. Just another mistake that they made.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, we have all these different things kind of stacking up against Darlie Routier, and she's arrested, and the jury convicts her in February of 1997. So it all happened pretty fast.
Yeah, that's very good.
For a double homicide trial.
Yeah.
That should have had a pretty long investigation, but nope. And sentenced, of course, to life in prison. Now, this was just for murdering Damon, actually. So she's convicted of murdering Damon. She's never been tried in the death of Devon.
She's not been tried in that death.
So in theory, she could be.
She was actually. She's on death row. It wasn't life in prison.
That's right, death row.
She's put to death, and it's Texas, so
it could happen.
It not like if it was California, it would never happen. But it's Texas. They have a speed lane into the injection, into lethal injection. Like they like to kill people in Texas. That's from an investigator on this case, actually.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Texas definitely don't play around with the death penalty. They don't. Yeah, so she's at risk, and of course her husband divorced her
in 2011. They said it was a mutual thing because he was out and trying to live life, and she didn't want to hold him up and things like that. But there's some other things behind that as well. Like she says in an interview, she says she still has love for him, but there's reasons why she could never be with him again.
I think the prison part.
Part of it is the prison part, yes. But like the question was, if you got out right now, if you were exonerated and got out, would you go back to being with your husband? And she said no, because there are some things, especially things that have to do with this case, that came out afterwards.
Some intrigue, huh?
Yeah.
Did they say what?
Oh yeah, I know. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay. Because I didn't hear that. I'm interested. Now.
Oh yeah, that's some stuff. That's some interesting stuff.
So let's take a look at the state of mind, right? So I mentioned the depression, and that was a key part of the prosecution, that depression makes you kill your children, at least in this particular case. She did have a history of anxiety and postpartum depression. So they were right in the sense that she had depression. I don't know about the whole killing people because of depression, but
in my experience, depression is more likely to make someone inflict harm on themselves or try and kill themselves, not kill other people. Very rarely do people do a murder-suicide thing,
Well,
and especially not leaving two people out of it.
yeah, and a high energy. People are depressed or they're not energetic, right? They're down, they're tired, often fatigued. This was a high energy. If she did it, murder and cover up.
Yeah, especially with that 150-yard sprint. Like, there are very few people who are struggling with major depressive disorder who can make a 150-yard sprint after repeatedly stabbing two different people and themselves.
Most people who are depressed want to feel better, not
They tend to, yeah.
do something.
They want to end the pain. They want to end the pain,
Right,
not
so-
inflict more.
That would even be perhaps a case for wanting to harm themselves. We see that more often, but wanting to harm someone else, I can't think of any case where any instance where that might make you feel better, unless you think that's the source of your depression or something. But perhaps, if it's postpartum, but the 7-month-old was upstairs, so I don't know. That seems conflicting to me.
Yeah. Murder-suicides with a firearm, that's more consistent because that's easy. It doesn't take as much energy.
Firearm,
Bang,
arson,
bang, bang.
poison.
Arson, poison, or even like being in a car closed off in the garage. And you take the kids, strap them in their seats, let them go to sleep, then turn the car on, and have let all the carbon dioxide fill up and go out peacefully in your sleep. Like that's the kind of thing that you might see.
There was a case in the Northwest, I can't remember the name, where two women, their romantic partners, had adopted children, I think quite a few adopted children, and they drove their van off of a cliff. After taking some type of, I think it was antihistaminic Benadryl or something, like a lot of Benadryl.
I mean, if you have a cliff to drive off of, and you want to do it, like that's one way of doing it. I don't think that stabbing your kids and then running a football field and a half is really consistent with depressive state. But the prosecution was also saying that it was about money, about her wanting to do a lavish lifestyle.
But she'd have to survive.
Yeah.
If she wanted to end her own life, why would she plant the sock? Like, there's just so much that doesn't make sense. I mean, that's a final act. You're not looking to the future. Like, well, if I'm not successful, I better have a plan to point the finger at a mysterious intruder. It's not how it works.
Right.
It would have been pretty obvious if she was trying to bring an end to her life. It would have been obvious that she killed them and she wanted to hurt herself.
Yeah.
They had also found a suicide note in a journal from a month prior to the murders. And so there are things certainly that indicate that that her depression was severe. Writing a suicide note to your kids, that's a pretty extreme step in that.
Yeah, but often journals aren't meant to be read by anyone or be something. A suicide note or a suicide tape or something is meant to be seen by other people.
You remember the movie Open Water? I think it was 2003. It was
Trying to remember it.
Tom and I want to say Eileen Lonergan. I think it was Lonergan. So they were left by a boat in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, and they drowned. Like the captain got all mixed up with the count. It's a whole big story. It's a disaster. The people couldn't count. Like, it was frightening. So clearly they were killed by negligence, even though the captain was eventually found not guilty of manslaughter or whatever. They had dark, disturbing notes predicting their deaths. Like, the Tom did, and then the wife was concerned with them, Eileen. I think that a lot of people make records like that, but we only find out about it when something terrible like that happens.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think they're reading way, way too much into.
I agree. Sometimes those things are exercises in getting it out. That's something I've advised clients to do. Write it down, get it out.
There's actually nothing that you can write in a journal that'll make you look not guilty to a future crime. Like, if she had wrote, "I'm definitely not going to kill anybody."
Then why did she write that?
She was thinking about it.
It's like she was thinking about doing it.
I'm not worried about mysterious intruders.
She must have been worried about mistake. She was thinking about how to come up with this story.
It's just, yeah, it's almost like, in a way, I think it's an invasion of privacy, right? It's. I'm not sure I like the whole idea of taking diaries and stuff, and you couldn't take contents of a confession, right? I mean, that's protected, that's sacrosanct. But you can take somebody's diary. What if her religious belief was to confess to the diary?
Right.
I don't know. It seems like dirty pool. It doesn't seem like the interest of justice to take that stuff.
It doesn't. But the prosecutors were also talking about the money aspect. Like there was life insurance on the two boys. But the defense was saying, well, the life insurance was about $10,000. It wasn't even enough to do 2 different burial plots for Devin and Damon. They were buried in the same coffin, in the same plot, because they couldn't afford to get 2 different ones. Mm-hmm. And her husband had an $800,000 life insurance policy on him. He'd be the one I'd go after. If it's really a money thing, and I've said this in other videos, I don't buy the life insurance thing. Like there's more strict investigations on life insurance by the life insurance company than there is by investigators in a murder case.
Never works out.
It never works out. Never.
Yeah, also, the insured has to be the one who dies, which didn't happen.
Right. Yeah. He didn't die. So where's the money? Like if this was really about money, why didn't she kill Darren? Why did she go after the 2 boys to get maybe $10,000, which then was spent on their funeral and is gone?
Yeah, she's really gained absolutely nothing and lost a lot. So she had no history of violence. I'm not aware if she had a criminal record. If she did, it was not pronounced. I'm not aware if she had any.
I don't believe she did.
If she did, they probably would have made a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what it was. It might have been shoplifting or something, but
Yeah, I think she had no criminal record at all prior to
none. So escalated right to double homicide.
right to murder.
And she had no history of psychopathy. So she'd have depression and anxiety, but nothing as far as psychopathy.
Millions of other people have anxiety and depression as well.
Well, and psychopathy who don't kill, right? Mm-hmm. Like police officers, paramedics tend to have subclinical psychopathy, right? Not like the kind where they'll kill people and all that, but just a little bit of callousness because they have to,
right,
to be effective for that line of work. Soldiers, skydivers, same thing. Like
thrill
surgeons.
seekers.
Yeah. Surgeons are notorious for having subclinical psychopathy, and it's very important that they do.
Oh yeah, you gotta compartmentalize all that stuff away. Like if you can't compartmentalize cutting into a human being, you're not going to be much of a surgeon.
Yeah. Yeah, but interestingly, nobody would accuse them of automatically being monsters. So it's
some of them.
Well,
maybe.
yeah, there was that I can't remember his name, but there was a surgeon in, I think it was in Texas. It's a case, Dr. Death, but that's a common name that's used for any PhD or MD that kills anybody.
Hannibal Lecter.
Right. Yeah. What was it? Yeah, but
he was a psychiatrist, but he also had been a surgeon.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That character had been a surgeon as well. I can't remember this guy's name, but he was a butcher. It was horrible. It was one of the worst cases I've seen. I have a video on it, but it's not released yet. I think it's on Patreon at this point. So we see.
You heard it here first.
What's that?
About your new video. You heard it here first. It's not released anywhere else.
Insider information on this one.
That's right.
You had to get like an hour into the video before you found out about it, but if you did, good on you.
It was buried in there. So we have the silly string, this idea that she was materialistic, narcissistic, all this. And that's really it. There's really no smoking gun to say, her behavior was leading up to this murder.
Right. And there's some other stuff, as I mentioned, there's some other stuff that kind of leads back to and things that police never checked on. It kind of leads back to the maybe there was an intruder kind of thing. There's uncorroborated standards because it wasn't firmly investigated at the time. Things about Darren talking to other people about trying to find someone to burglarize his home. Like he wanted to do an insurance scam. Like he wanted to have somebody come in, steal a bunch of stuff out of the house and put it into a storage container. And then file an insurance claim because they were running real high over their debt. Their debt to income ratio was terrible. So if we take all this stuff and put it in a storage container, and then file the insurance claim, get the money for the insurance claim, we can just bring the stuff back a little bit at a time, and then we'll be fine. And he asked some people about it that he knew, but he was going to hire somebody, but he never actually hired anyone specifically. He just kind of put it out there, and then he kind of put the word out that he was looking for somebody to do it. And here's where the interesting part is: the night that this happened, Darlie's Land Cruiser, I think it was, she had a car. Her vehicle was not at the house, and Darren's Jaguar had broken down, and it was in the shop. So that evening, there's no cars in the driveway. There's no lights on inside because everybody's asleep. Mm-hmm. If I'm a burglar who's heard that this guy wants his house burgled, that's a perfect night to do it. Nobody's home, as far as I can tell.
Right.
I'm going in, and all of a sudden, there's
It all falls
three
apart.
people.
yeah, all falls apart. Like I go in, and all of a sudden there's a kid staring at me, and it's like, oh crap! And kid starts to open his mouth, and then it just goes from there. And like that lends a little bit more credence to it, but the police never looked into that side of it because the Darren wasn't part of it. Now, am I saying that happened? No, I don't know whether that happened or not. But that's the thing that Darlie said she'd heard while she was in prison, which is the reason why she wouldn't ever go back to be with him. Because if he really did try and set up this insurance scam, then he's the reason somebody came in the house and killed her sons, and why she's on death row right now.
Well, one part of that does make a lot of sense. A burglar at night would not expect, in a two-story, like a colonial, right, if I remember right, would not expect anyone to be on the first floor.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So again, kind of wandering through, maybe didn't even grab the knife at first, and got surprised and reached over and grabbed it. I think it was a distance from the kitchen, but maybe grabbed it first, and just got completely startled and didn't expect anybody to be on that level, which explains why only people on that level were harmed.
Right.
It's possible.
I think it is possible. It does lead me to reasonable doubt in this particular case. But that's the issues with this case, is that the investigation is so badly handled.
So focused on
She's our suspect that they didn't explore anything else beyond that. Yeah. And the silly string video put her in prison. Mm-hmm. Like I said, the jury watched that tape like a dozen times or more while they were making deliberations. They kept going back to it.
It's worrisome they would think that was a valuable piece of evidence. It doesn't really point, I don't think, one way or the other as far as guilt or innocence. Unless they found it just entertaining. They like silly string. It just seems unusual to fixate on that particular.
Right.
It is interesting to note that in 2008, Routier was granted the right to new DNA tests, mm-hmm. and that they tested some blood samples that had been collected at the time and showed the DNA was not from anyone who lived in the home, and that there was a bloody fingerprint found in the house.
That did not match anybody.
That didn't match anybody in the home. And in 2018, Criminal District Court number 3 ordered a third round of DNA testing with backing of both prosecution and defense in the case. And if they could find, if they find that DNA matches a specific person, it might be enough to exonerate her.
Yeah, so this is one of these cases that rides on a razor's edge where we've talked about other cases like this where people are passionate. Scott Peterson, passionate, like 100% he did it or 100% he didn't. There's a lot of people that believe that Routier is not guilty. But there are, I think, a surprising number of people that are positive she did it. Again, we see these extremes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get it. To me, I think there's reasonable doubt.
I do too.
At the same time, I think she probably did it, but nowhere near enough to get past reasonable doubt. I said before that I was 55, 60% sure. That's pretty much where I am. I don't see moving too much off that.
I'm kind of 50-50. Like, I think that if she did it, she came up with some really weird reasons to do things. Mm-hmm. I still don't understand the sock. But if she did it, then I think it might have been a spur of the moment thing, where she just went for it without planning it out.
Yeah,
I don't think it was planned.
But then somehow kind of walked back and tried to build a defense that almost succeeded. If it hadn't been for the silly string, probably never would have been charged.
Yeah. But I think you're right on that one. If she hadn't been playing with silly string, which wasn't even her idea, but it got caught on camera. It's the worst thing a human being can do, play with silly string. I think if she hadn't been caught doing that, they wouldn't even have arrested her. They would have said there's just not enough here. But with that, they went, oh, look at her. Oh, we're gonna get her.
Yeah. Yeah, the same, as I understand it, the same person who was disgusted, that prosecutor, was indicted for felony, although he was never convicted. Some type of tampering with evidence or tampering with a public record or something like that. So I kind of feel like when a prosecutor gets arrested, that's not a great sign.
No, that's not a great sign at all.
Although, again, no conviction, so who knows? Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But yeah, I don't get the whole disgusted by that piece. And that, I think, is not just what happened in this case. I think that's how many people in the public feel. Mm-hmm. The silly string really angers people. The laughing at a funeral. Yeah. Or service.
Yeah. But again, that happened after the somber part of the service. The whole point of that part of the gathering was kind of the same point as like a New Orleans funeral. Like, celebrate the life that they had and celebrate what's going on. Kind of try and bring some brightness into this terrible thing, this terrible tragedy. Because if we let ourselves fall into darkness, that's the only thing we're going to have. And unfortunately, that moment of brightness turned into the darkest point for Darlie, other than losing her 2 kids.
Yeah.
Whether she did it or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that I am firmly convinced that's the thing that convicted her. Because of looking at all the other evidence, I don't see it. I have reasonable doubt. I'm 50-50 on whether she did it or not. But that's because the evidence just doesn't show me. But I'm 100% on that silly string being the thing that got her.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's... I certainly... You get this impression from Darlie that she wasn't being careful about how she was being perceived. Like, she wasn't trying to play the role of a grieving mother. She wasn't playing it perfectly. But that kind of points to not being guilty.
Yeah. If she really had done it and was this criminal mastermind, she would have been super weepy every time anyone with a camera could have been near.
Yeah.
And, careful to show all of that grief emotion. But that's the thing that gets people pointed at all the time, right? Investigators are always making that they're not grieving properly. Mm-hmm. And that becomes a suspicious point for them.
And she would even use terms like, if I had done it, or people that would do something like this would do X, Y, and Z. So I heard some people pointing to, she talks so much about knowing what someone in this situation would do or would not do, or what a murderer would or would not do. And
so do we.
So, yeah, and so that's kind of the point, is that, she talked about a lot of different things. Does that mean anything? Not necessarily.
Yeah, so consider this. If she's guilty, then she's where she needs to be, although I don't agree with the death penalty part, but being in prison. What's it like if she didn't do it? I mean, she's been there for, at the time of making this video, about, 25 years? Is that right?
Yeah.
Because she didn't make bail, I don't think.
No.
On murder. So, yeah, since 1996, June of 1996. And we're making this in July of 2021. That's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a very long time. If she didn't do it, and there's burglar turned killer. We've never seen that before. If there's a burglar turned killer out there, they've gotten away with it for 25 years, and Darlie's been the one paying the price.
Yeah.
It's worth making sure that DNA is tested.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe her appeals will be successful. I think about, was it 4% of cases are successfully appealed? 4% of convictions are overturned, something like that. It's not
huge.
Not promising for her.
No.
That's 1 in 25. Yeah. I mean, I guess the good news.
Of course, the thing that skews that statistic is the plea agreement stuff.
Right.
Like when you're entering a plea agreement, you're agreeing not to appeal that decision. And so people don't.
Also, I think Mickey Mouse crimes. Like,
Yeah.
Who's gonna?
Yeah.
You're not going to get on a TV show about an exoneration for like a shoplifting charge, or jaywalking.
Yeah, no, the Project Innocence probably not going to help you out for that misdemeanor
Marijuana possession.
violation. Yeah, the misdemeanor marijuana possession is probably not going to get Project Innocence interested, even if there's DNA to show it wasn't you. But yeah, it's that kind of issue is why it's so important to test the DNA and to appeal in a case like this.
Yeah. So you would assume that with a murder case, there's a lot of attention to detail, a lot of attention to the evidence, high stakes. So maybe the rate that they get overturned is a little higher. I don't know. But either way, it is still doesn't look good in general. Because even if she's successful, there'd be another trial. They're not going to let it go. Although she's done 25 years, so
If they get DNA that points to somebody else, then they might let it go for her. Of course, then she has grounds to sue for a huge, lavish lifestyle for the rest of her life after that. Because if she's exonerated on it, then she's like, wrongful imprisonment, 25 years. That's millions.
right. They could do an Alford. That's probably what we won't retry you. Like not if she's exonerated, but like if it's overturned and she's going to be tried again, they could do an Alford plea and then not have to pay any of that.
Yeah.
That might be a tactic. We've seen that happen in a few high-profile cases like the West Memphis 3.
Yeah. That's another case entirely. West Baptist 3.
That'd be another good case to look at
It would be.
someday. It's got Johnny Depp in there.
Yeah. Any case with Johnny Depp. That's good. Oh, man, I meant movie. Any movie with Johnny Depp. Some of the cases involving him are not good.
Well, he's got the whole case with
Amber Heard.
who is it?
Amber Heard.
Amber Heard. That's right. That's right. Been a while since I've done those videos. So, yeah. So that's Darlie Routier or
Routier.
however you
One
pronounce
of those pronunciations is correct, or none of them are, and we're just way
Yeah,
off.
yeah. We're close. I think it's close. Right. So, final thoughts on this case before we wrap up?
I don't think I'm any less torn between guilt or innocence than when we started, which I didn't necessarily expect to whatever, but so it's difficult, and I'm thankful that I don't have to make these decisions. I'm thankful I'm not part of a jury, or I'm certainly thankful I'm not a lawyer or a judge for that matter, because this is somebody's life, and about 25 years in prison, and maybe she did, maybe she didn't. So these things are extremely difficult, and I don't know what would have made it any better other than pictures, videos, some kind of really substantial evidence, for guilt or innocence. So maybe that's the key there. Maybe we just need to get everything on video always. Just have just. He said it.
We're headed that way, right? I mean, that's if you look at modern cases.
Yeah.
There would be probably 3 or 4 neighbors that have like ring cams or other surveillance cameras.
Would have seen somebody potentially.
You could see her running or someone else running with a sock.
There you go.
And case closed. Yeah. But in 1996, I mean, all these things were not too far off, but they weren't there.
Right.
And it's unfortunate. Just one piece of evidence could make the whole difference here. But we don't have it. We're stuck with interpreting the silly string usage behavior. And that's pretty much the limit of 1996 technology, apparently.
Silly string apparently is the limit of 1996 technology.
It was the pinnacle of achievement.
Now, I think that the narration of Robert Stack made this case much more interesting, but the details were lacking in the Unsolved Mysteries presentation. Finding out more of the details just made it more confusing for me. You know, did she do it? Didn't she do it? I went from after watching the Unsolved Mysteries thing for so many years, because I love that show over and over and over again, I'd see the segment every once in a while. I'd be like, yeah, she probably did it. And I started looking into it, and I was like 60% sure she did it. Now I'm like 50-50. And I'm like, I looked into it more and found more ambiguity, more ambivalence. Did she? I don't know. But I definitely know the silly string is evil. Don't play with silly string. You'll be convicted of double murder.
That's right. It leads to terrible, terrible outcomes.
Unless you're Spider-Man.
Yeah, in which case it could be a positive. But yeah, normally silly string, terrible in these cases. So I think for me, this case is one of these situations where we're in this weird position with the prosecution where they're essentially saying, you know, they have a timeline, a set of circumstances where this killer has to be a mastermind. So they're not smart enough to avoid killing people, but they're smart enough to get away with it under these really highly variable circumstances.
And not even smart enough to actually get away with it.
Right, ultimately. Yeah,
They're smart enough to almost get away with it.
Yeah, it's not super convincing when the prosecution has to talk about how the defendant is a genius. It seems like they kind of lose their own argument, right? in that maneuver. A case maybe we can cover someday that has a similar feel as the Jeff Pelly case. You ever hear that one?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Town in Indiana where a father, his wife, and 2 daughters were murdered, and they think that the 17-year-old son was convicted of doing it, and the police narrowed down the timeline to 20 minutes. He had 20 minutes to kill them, clean up all the blood. No blood was found. No physical evidence was found connecting him to the crime. It's incredible. Like, he'd have to be like an Avenger, like a superhuman, you know. It's
got to be like the Flash.
The Flash,
who's a Justice League member, not an Avenger.
That's right. Just for clarification.
Just for clarification, that's DC, not Marvel.
Yeah. So that guy's in prison for 160 years, although he has some appeals that I don't think I promise or not, but. That might be a case we can look at. It's another one where we see, you know,
another case that was contemporary to Darlie was Patricia Stallings. I don't know if you ever heard about that. When she was actually convicted of murdering her child and assaulting her second child with poison, and she was actually later exonerated.
Oh wow, well, that sounds like an interesting case.
That is a very interesting case. It really is an interesting one. It happened right around the same time as Darlie's case was happening.
Yeah.
So kind of the same thing where the prosecutors just jumped on it, said she did this, and railroaded, and ultimately she was exonerated.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting to take a look at a few exoneration cases. They're very frightening. Yeah. How easy it is to go to prison.
You could do a whole episode, innocent or guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, that's right.
Because that's what it seems like in some of those cases. Like they're guilty, and then they have to prove themselves innocent later on.
Yeah, that's unfortunately how it works in too many cases. So that's where we'll wrap up with Darlie Routier. Interesting case. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Great analysis of a fascinating case that maybe we'll hear more about in the future. Something happens with the appeals.
If we do, we'll give an update.
Absolutely. Yep. So please put any thoughts you have about this case in the comments. We always appreciate those. Is Darlie really guilty? Is she innocent? You know, how sure are you? Things like that. I want to thank you for watching this episode of The Murder Part. We will talk to you soon.